Hey, Adam. I just got a text from Mike, and he is running a little late. He's on the phone right now, actually discussing this topic with somebody, so he'll be joining us shortly.
Okay, great, fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon for our small group discussion regarding the visioning for Cruse Avenue. And if if any of you attended the meeting last night, you'll recall that we presented 3 different options for Cruse Avenue. And Mike Dowling with Dowling Architects is here on the call with me, and he's going to walk through those options again as part of this meeting. And we wanted to have these smaller group meetings to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input and feedback on these options that have been visualized based on interviews that we've conducted over the last couple months with some stakeholders in the community. We've conducted about 40 of those interviews, and we pulled out some common themes and threads from those interviews that have made its way into these visualizations. Nothing in either of these is predetermined. These are opportunities that we're presenting. We've received some real valuable feedback from the community. And what we'll be doing is we'll be taking feedback and input from these small group meetings. There was one that we had held earlier this morning at 10 o'clock. We'll have this one and then 2 more tomorrow. And we'll be presenting feedback and input that we received from these small group meetings at our wrap-up session tomorrow night between starting at 5:30 through 7 o'clock. I think we've got some pretty consistent feedback so far on the different options, and we'd certainly like to go through the options again. We'll put those up on the screen. Mike Dowling will walk through those with you, and we'll open it up to any questions, comments, or concerns from the group after Mike's had a chance to present these options again. So thank you all for your attendance again this afternoon. We look forward to hearing from you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, Adam. I am going to share my screen, and I'll go through the slides we went through last night. And then at the end, I'll sort of open it up to just kind of, kind of get some back and forth and some interactive feedback going, and we can zoom in on certain areas and, sort of just get your guys' thoughts. So with that, all right, so let's see if I get my laser pointer working. Okay, so on the screen is just an overall view of the project area, starting at sort of the south end. South is to the left of my screen, and north is to the right. East is on the bottom side where the Rodney Street neighborhood is. Yeah, sorry, and then west on the upper side. So the project boundaries sort of start where Cruse meets Park Avenue down here at the corner, and then goes up, and we've kind of broken it into sort of 2 sections because it works for the graphics, to Broadway, and then from Broadway through 6th to Lawrence. And at this point, it ends at Lawrence, mostly because when you get towards Mini Malfunction Junction, it becomes kind of a whole new challenge. Okay, so we've actually developed sort of 2 options, and there's a lot of similarities between the 2 of them, but there's also significant differences. The first option that we're looking at, we've called the narrowed street option, where we maintain traffic, vehicular traffic through all of Cruse Avenue, but take advantage of the right-of-way that we have and narrow up what needs to be street which frees up a certain amount of property that can be repurposed. So most of Cruse Avenue is 65 feet wide, the right of way. So about where my cursor is now to the other side of the street is 65 feet. And because of what Cruse was intended to be originally, that is all paved. Literally from curb to curb or right of way to right of way is asphalt. So in the first scheme, we take the street itself and look at a different street section. So rather than having 65 feet of asphalt, we narrow it down to 40 feet of asphalt. And what that allows us to have is 2 drive lanes that are each 12 feet wide, which is standard, and then 8 feet on either side of that for parallel parking the entire distance. What that does is, at a minimum, frees up 25 feet of width. Where I'm at right now, it's sort of on that east side that we can do something with. And what it also does is there's certain areas along Cruse where fairly large parcels of land can become available for different use. If I sort of back up, I'll back up to the larger picture. This big, huge grassy area at the south end is all right of way. It goes from sort of the access road to the south to the point to the north. And by narrowing it up to a 2-lane street that's only 40 feet wide, we actually free up enough space on this south parcel to possibly consider housing. And so what this shows is townhouse style units that would be parking in the back with tuck under garages and then front porches that would access this new 25-foot kind of greenway. These would be market rate housing, not low income, and would be envisioned that sort of first-time homebuyers or downtown employees who want to be able to walk to work might consider purchasing units like this. So a couple of consistent things throughout all the slides. I've got a dark gray line that follows the street in this scheme the entire distance. That would be a bike path, and that would actually be at street level, separated from the drive lane by a curb, but it would actually be down at the street level. And so there would be a curb on the other side of that, which is where we would start to delineate sort of a wider pedestrian walkway that connects the south and all the way to the north. So by capturing this space, we can create kind of a mini linear green zone through this area where there could be benches. This shows a little grouping of benches with some trees and another group of benches right here. So as we move a little bit to the north, then we have Cutler, which is the street that comes down here and intersects Cruse. And right now, kind of like the south end of Cruse, is this great big area, which when Cruse was envisioned as a bypass of Helena, was going to become a major sort of on-ramp and off-ramp onto Cruse. Well, that space is underutilized. So by narrowing it up to just a 40-foot wide street, we actually are able to free up a fairly sizable chunk of land, which in this case could be acquired by the Helena Housing Authority, for example, and possibly do more low-income housing or subsidized housing on their property. So the next sort of big move that this slide is showing, and actually all of our schemes are showing the same thing, although it's not something that is necessary, but was sort of an idea that came out, was the idea of relocating the neighborhood center, RMDC, into a new or a different facility because of some of the opportunities that starts to present on the south end of the walking mall. And so the idea is to, rather than having the walking mall come down and just dead end, would actually connect to perhaps an extended walking mall area that connects then to our trail system and walking system that we're developing. What it does is create a very large park space at the south end of our downtown. And so this could be used for a variety of things. And in one of the schemes, we actually show a performance, outdoor performance theater and a few other things in this area. So then moving to the north end, we've got, I'm starting to show what will become a little bit more evident in the next scheme. This place here on Cruse where the pedestrian underpath actually goes underneath the street and connects to the park. And one of the things that we identified here is that there's actually no stairs or way to get from Cruse down to that park. And also there's this great kind of overlook opportunity to the park and to Mount Helena and the south side of Helena here, that we could create sort of this seating area, for example, on one side, and then the staircase on the other side that would link directly to that trail system that goes under the park. And it's all sort of geared around the idea of visually and physically sort of connecting the fire tower itself and the trail systems to perhaps a small stair that leads up to that, crosses the street, engages this sort of elevated plaza space, and then links down to the park space. You get this connection between those three elements. So the orange, as I was starting to say, the dark gray is the bike path. This orange would be plazas or sidewalks. And so as you follow through, you can kind of see where all of those are going toward the north. This is actually where there's the staircase and a little covered walkway that goes down to this parking lot from Cruse. So we'd have a little crosswalk there. And then at the north, there's actually a sort of steep trail system that goes up to the fire tower here. So we may be able to do some structured staircase right there. So moving north, this is where we just left off. The other consistent sort of thing through all the slides are the red roofs are new rooftops that are just ideas and possibilities. In most cases, they're residential. So all of the ones on the south end of this portion of the slide would be townhouse style units, again, with parking from behind into garages and access to the walkways in the front. But there's also, for example, on the independent record property, maybe there's an apartment building that comes in here, and possibly there's an opportunity in the Bert and Ernie's parking lot for a portion of that to have a building that sort of reacts to the Holter Museum on the other side and creates a synergy there. A couple of moves that we're making here is taking some of the parking lots and obviously displacing some parking, but bringing these market rate sort of urban transitional housing into downtown Helena, you know, with the idea of sort of increasing night activity and vibrancy in the downtown, and then ultimately, you know, having more development and more buildings get remodeled. But what we want to try to do is increase the connectivity from the residential neighborhoods to the east into the downtown, because as we all know, the topography changes and the grade changes in this area are substantial. And Cruse essentially functions as a sort of a physical and a mental barrier for crossing. So wherever we can, like this Broadway crossing, which is a very wide crossing right now for pedestrian, we narrow at the narrowest point to 24 feet. So right now it's probably 100 feet across from sidewalk to sidewalk, and we would narrow that to 24. In this area right here, there's actually a little staircase right now that exists coming off of Warren that comes down to this parking lot. So I thought this was an opportunity to actually connect to an existing pathway on the other side that goes down, perhaps come through this alley, come across Jackson Street and enter the existing plaza space that feeds down into the walking mall. So we increase that connectivity to the neighborhoods, to the downtown. Moving north in the 2 city lots, we just take a small portion of those lots and put some housing in there. All of the properties still have access either off of 6th or Cruse in this scenario. Getting to the intersection of 6th, we narrow up those crossings. And then as we move into the block between 6th and Lawrence, we have an opportunity, and this sort of became evident as we started walking and really taking a look at these things a little bit differently. But this spot right here on Cruse is probably 15 feet above the sidewalk down below. And it's just a chain link fence wall right there. But it's got incredible views of downtown, looking at the power block, Montana Club building, the City County building, Mount Helena. And so the idea of creating sort of a plaza space right across from the 7th Avenue gym and the old Independent Record building really was kind of appealing. And so we're kind of bump out into that lower parking lot, create an elevated plaza space, and then a staircase again that goes down and connects over to Constitution Park that then ultimately gets us down to Last Chance Gulch and the beginning of the walking mall. So at this point, we've actually shifted the sort of the pedestrian sidewalk and 25-foot space to the west, and we have a green space and walkway and more opportunities for benches until we get over to Lawrence. So that is option 1. Option 2 is something that sort of came out of our stakeholder meetings when we were talking to people about the trailheads and the mountain biking activities that exist in sort of beyond Park Avenue, where Park and Cruse meet here, and a lot of people do head up into the hills at this point. So it creates a linear park, and traffic along Cruse in this scenario would be eliminated to the general public with emergency vehicle access only, with the exception of the spur between Park and Cutler Street, which we can't really cut off Cutler, and this actually allows a loop to happen out of the south end of the town up to Cutler Street and ultimately to State and Rodney, and sort of feeds what little traffic there is in this area up into the neighborhoods. But here you can see sort of the enhancement of that fire tower plaza idea. So this is right where that pedestrian underpass is. And this is elevated about a story level, maybe a story and a half above the park. And then we'd have this sort of gradual sloping walkway down to the walking mall and enhanced park space with perhaps outdoor amphitheater performance space, elevated seating. There's about a 30-foot drop from where my cursor is right here down to where the stage would be actually. And then again, the bike path is the gray, and the pedestrian paths are kind of this tannish orange color. But this fundamentally makes a 65 to potentially 100-foot wide park that would replace Cruse Avenue. Much of the property to the east is city-owned property. A lot of it just very steep. but the sort of the toe of that property where it comes down and meets Cruse does have the ability to sort of enhance this sort of park idea. So as we get to the north part of this slide on the right-hand side, this is that hill that actually leads up to the fire tower. And there's a kind of a gentler slope right here where I thought there might be an opportunity to have kind of an impromptu small performance space as well. As we move to the north, the building ideas, and the opportunities for infill pretty much stay the same, and the connectivity from the neighborhoods to the downtown stay the same. The big difference is just replacing the street with an urban park and the amenities that can come along with that. The one little change we do have to do is we would take where the access into this parking lot is right now off of Cruse, we would actually re-divert that over through a little bit of unutilized park area onto 6th Avenue. And here across from the 7th Avenue gym, we just have a larger enhanced public plaza that can actually lead up between the two buildings as well. So that's the linear park concept. The third idea, and I'm just going to sort of recap the first two. Here's the narrowed street option put together from south to north. The linear park concept from south to north. And the third just says, well, we combine the two. We have linear park from Broadway south, and we have the narrowed street option from Broadway to Lawrence. Realizing after looking at traffic counts that there is more traffic that takes Cruse from Broadway north. And there's the car counts going from Broadway to the south they're not insignificant, but they're definitely small. So that is where we're at right now. As Adam mentioned, I want to emphasize that these ideas are here to pick apart, get people's thoughts on what do we like, what don't we like. A lot of the feedback this morning and even some of the emails that have been coming through are related to the neighborhood center, and that kind of is a big unknown. One thing I would say relative to that is we obviously wouldn't dislocate RMDC and Head Start without having a new home for them, first of all. And secondly, the two schemes work even if the neighborhood center stays. The idea of having the narrowed street works even if this does not become parkland and just stays in its current use. And the linear park idea could work just fine as well. We just wouldn't have a park here. It would just be the linear park along Cruse Avenue. So that is certainly a sensitive piece of it that in the end, we would definitely show options where the neighborhood center remains, and then options if there's an opportunity to find a new home for them that makes sense and works better. So with that, I will leave my screen up, and we can start looking at comments and thoughts. If people want to talk, I think you have the ability to raise your hand, unless Adam or anybody wants to pick up on where I left off.
No, that was good, Mike. Thanks for that overview. Yeah, let's leave it open to the public and see what questions, concerns, comments they have.
How do I raise my hand, or do I just start talking?
I think we only have 12 people on this thing, or we got 16. It's not showing up on my screen at this moment.
Well, to answer that question, if you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen, it pops up with, on the left, mute, start video, and then in the middle, participants chat, share screen, etc. If you hit the chat button,
Chat. Right here.
another window will pop up, and raise hand is an option. Looks like Lee found it.
Right, yeah, my question is how many housing units are we talking about?
So in this scheme, let me just count. Got 1, 2, 3.
Mm.
So this is showing about 35 townhouse style units. If there's an apartment building or condo building built on the independent record property, it's hard to say how many that would be, but I would guess probably 12 to 20. And then Helena Housing Authority, I do know that they ultimately want to add units on their property as well. So how many that is, I'm not sure, but market rate, this shows possibility of 30 to 35.
Okay, thanks. That was my question.
This is Kathy from the chamber. I was just wondering, it looks like a pretty huge impact on the number of parking spaces, which are normally pretty busy. I'm just wondering what that impact is. And it looks like on the lot where the chamber building is, that there would be residential all along there. And I'm thinking that they would use our parking lot also, or how does that work?
So with the townhouse units, two thoughts there. One, I don't know, you can't guarantee this, but being sort of urban edge type housing, it would not be uncommon for whoever purchases these to have only one vehicle. And the thought is to have garages that they would build as a part of those units, and they would access those off of the parking lots. But there is a reduction in parking, and we've tried to focus on areas where all the parking lots are perhaps just a little bit larger than they need to be, and that, like for example, I'll zoom in on Kathy, the area that is near and dear to you. So this would displace, because there's a curb cut that actually comes off of Cruse that takes up quite a bit of this, but I don't know if there's 10 or 12 parking spaces that actually face Cruse Avenue on that lot. But I think we can actually add a few in the back as well. So I don't think there would be a detrimental effect on that. Across the street,
Cruise buses would not be able to come through, right?
What's that?
The cruise buses that have cruise, people, the buses, loads of people and stuff, they would not be able to get in and out of there, right?
They wouldn't be able to loop through there, but I think there's enough room for them to get in and out.
When we have meetings and stuff downstairs, the parking lot's pretty full. In fact, we have to send people over to the one across the street, like when we have Leadership Helena and different things. So we'd probably have to start having those things off campus.
So do you think parking across the street, if we improve pedestrian connections between the two sides, it would be prohibitive of having meetings there?
If there's enough room over there, but it looks like you're taking quite a bit of the parking space across the street too.
Kathy, when
Go
are
ahead,
you?
Adam.
Yeah, I was just going to ask Kathy, when are those meetings held? What time of day?
Oh, we have meetings here all day long on different times. Now they're all on Zoom, so it wouldn't matter. Right now, it's not a good meeting time. No, they're usually held all morning. They're usually here in the mornings and stuff, but we have a lot of city and county meetings that are there that are sometimes all day long. And it just depends on what's going on. But sometimes the parking lot's extremely full. I won't even have a place to park when I come back. So
Yeah, that's good to know. We were looking at parking lot usage and some data that had been provided to us. And lot number 5, which I believe is the chamber parking lot, there are 51 number of stalls and 11 permits sold, indicating that there's 40 available parking lot stalls available.
that's
there.
because none of us that work in the building have a permit. We get a free one because we're residents of the building, but the parking commission, the MBAC, and the chamber all get, like I have 6 slots for the chamber, and there's probably 6 or so for MBAC, maybe 7. They might have more because they have SCORE in theirs, and then the parking commission just has 3, I think.
So those aren't included in those permit numbers that were provided.
Right. I wouldn't think so because none of us pay for a permit.
We'll have to verify that with the data that we were given. So yeah, that would still leave, 6, 12 plus 3, that'd be 15. That'd still leave about half of that lot available and open, including those that you just described.
Right. So how does this work with the housing though? So is that something that the city's going to sell those lots to a developer and then they'll develop it? Or, how is that gonna, I don't understand how they can, I assume that most all of this that you're using is city property.
Correct.
That's correct. Yep. So if the city were to move forward with this, they would likely have to follow their, disposition protocols, how they go about disposing of city property, whether that's, issuing a request for qualifications from the development community or an RFP. It would have to follow, some type of disposition protocol.
Kathy, it'd be similar to how the city disposed of the bus station, the old bus station property recently.
Right. Okay.
Looks like we've got some raised hands. I'm just going to go down in order. Lori, if you want to ask your question.
Hi. Yeah, this is Lori Lattice, and I'm the executive director at Rocky Mountain Development Council. And you are probably aware that we inhabit the neighborhood center and have, I think, since the time it was built. I am certainly open to the idea of relocating, but I'm curious about the people who have been interviewed and suggested our relocation, if they had some ideas of where that would be, where we would go.
Yeah, I can share with you, Lori, what some of the stakeholders have shared with us, and we kind of aggregated all of the interviews, together into common themes and threads. But one of the things that had been shared with stakeholders shared with us was, the ability to relocate somewhere other than where it currently is. The exact locations and things like that hadn't been discussed or considered. We don't have, an area or a building that had been mentioned or had been recommended as part of that process. I think it was really just focused on, what would the opportunity be for, connecting or enhancing this area if the the neighborhood center were to be relocated somewhere else. With that being said, I know in our our last meeting that we had this morning, there was some discussion among the participants about relocating the neighborhood center across Cruse Avenue, where the Helena Housing Authority is located, because we know that they've expressed interest in doing some additional units. And the idea was shared that perhaps, the services that are being provided out of the neighborhood center building could locate on the ground floor of this facility with additional units above it, and having some playground space being made available in some of the green areas around this, and having there'd be some benefit in having it in closer proximity to some of the residents there at the Helena Housing Authority facility. So in terms of specifics, I think that was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in terms of specifics, I think it's pretty open and very fluid at this point in terms of whether relocation makes sense and where that might be.
So is that building that you were circling just there, is that a proposed new building that Helena Housing Authority would be?
Correct. Yep, that's true.
Okay. And then I'm just curious about the stakeholders, because did you talk to anybody from Rocky during that interview process?
No, I don't believe we did.
Okay. Just curious, because I don't recall that I talked to anybody, and I just was curious about whether or not one of my staff had talked to you all.
No, I don't believe so, Lori.
So I just, sorry to say that I didn't realize that the plan included our building being gone. Just wanted to put that out there. So I'm kind of a little bit surprised by it, and just curious about, what we need to be, where we would be looking to go. So, but that's all I want to say.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that, Lori. And we apologize for not getting you in the queue in terms of the stakeholder interviews and sharing this with you beforehand. I'm glad that we're having the conversation now. Obviously, there's a lot to explore, and again, this is just a concept and potential opportunity with this particular site there. And as you can see, there's I think a lot of input and feedback yet to be received from the community in terms of getting to a viable alternative.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll just say is that I do think it looks very nice. I like the idea. If we could find a home close by or some place that would be just as good, that would be fine. We have quite a large organization and a lot of different programs. So yeah, I'm glad we're in on the conversation now and we can just go from there. But I do want to say that I think it looks very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lori.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to say that there wasn't really anybody specifically who said, "Yo, you need to get rid of that building." So don't think that there was somebody out there that was suggesting that. I think the things I'm going to sort of just back up, that got us to thinking about it were a couple of things. One, there's no place to access the parking behind the building except where it currently is due to the steepness of the slope along Cruse. So, ideally, we'd like to move this drive lane back down to over to this side, but it's just not possible. Plus, the connectivity to the walking mall and the parks is limited to just this little teeny pathway that comes off of right here. So the idea of making this sort of loop, and I'm going to draw just a couple of quick arrows that starts beginning of the walking mall, sort of goes down can connect. You know, this area in our town where people at lunch, for example, could go out and do a really nice sort of 2-mile loop or 1.5-mile loop is intriguing. Not to say it's necessary or a showstopper, but when we look at the vibrancy of the businesses along the walking mall and anything we can do to try to enhance their success and other development and businesses that would want to be down there, the more things you can do to get people walking past or going past the front doors of any of those businesses is definitely a good economic thing to do. So I think that's probably what drove that idea more than anything. And that's where, you know, the linear park, you can see now where that kind of sort of starts to knit the idea together. But that's just to enhance a little bit on that piece of it.
Somebody else can go. I don't want to hog the time.
I appreciate that. Well, let's just go right down the list. Becky Piskey. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but feel free to go ahead and ask your question.
There you go. Okay, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, my name's Paul. I'm Becky's husband. I've got 2 questions I'd like to ask, and I'll ask the easy one first. Would you comment on what effect you think all of this, any of the 3 plans would have on the business community downstairs, pros and cons? Is this going to help the business community? Is it going to hurt? Is it going to have no effect? The downtown community.
Yeah, well, you know, I think each of these options that is being considered here, the intent and goal is to create something that will be synergistic and supportive of those local businesses. I think concerns that have been brought up from the public are, you know, obviously what we just talked about in terms of the neighborhood center relocating it. The other is parking. And how does this impact, you know, the availability of parking to those local businesses? So it's certainly a big component of this. And, you know, the conversation this morning was around some of the concern about creating a linear park and eliminating the parking that's along Cruse that many businesses are dependent upon. And so, you know, that was one of the concerns that was brought up this morning in terms of the linear park concept, and how would the plan then relocate or accommodate the parking that would be taken off of Cruse in that manner. So I think those are, I think the parking is a consideration that needs to be looked at further as we go through this process and see what the impact would be and where, you know, additional parking could be added to balance that out. I think, you know, adding some residential component along Cruse, we are limited in terms of lot size of what we can and can't do. And one of the reasons that you see the product types being presented here is we don't have a size of lot adequate enough to do anything larger than townhomes. But the intent is that if we can bring in additional housetops into the area, that would be a captive audience for local businesses in the downtown, and providing another opportunity for those that work in the downtown to also live there as well. And, you know, 35 units, it's not a lot, but we think any little bit could certainly help in that regard. So, yeah, I think the other component too is there's a commercial building that's being proposed on the eastern end of Cruse that you see there with the red. And I think the intent there is to look at bringing in some type of, supportive service that may not already be in that area, something maybe like a neighborhood grocery store or pharmacy that could be more supportive of the local residents. Certainly
Where
don't
was
want,
that again?
it's right where that cursor is.
I don't see the cursor. What's it close to?
Across from the Holter Museum.
Yeah.
All the way to the right on your screen.
Maybe I'm on the wrong screen.
You shouldn't be touching.
I think this is Sharon, sometimes that strip of participants covers what's over on that side.
It does.
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay,
Sharon.
I have an idea where it's at. Thank you.
And so I think that would be the intent, would be to be bringing in some type of supportive service there that residents could enjoy. Certainly don't want to, detract from the businesses. And the intent with this plan is to try and help support those businesses and be complementary.
Okay, can I give you the second one?
Sure.
I'm quite pleased to see the residential opportunities that are going to open up or might open up downtown, because it just fits with my philosophy. I think we should try to live in town as much as we can. The problem I see across the nation is that living in town is so often much more expensive. And I would like to see some effort to try to keep in-town houses affordable. And so I'd like to suggest something that perhaps you could research and maybe even implement. There's an idea going around about property within the city not being sold to private ownership, but being retained in city ownership, but allowing private individuals to build a residence on it. So they don't own the property, they only own the house. When they go to sell that house down the road a piece, they can only sell the house. So there's no property value included in the selling price, which essentially keeps the selling price lower and more affordable to people who might want to live in town but cannot afford the otherwise very high prices. I don't know, there's probably a name for this concept. I don't know what it is. I've only talked to people casually about it, but it seems like it's a very good idea. And this would be a perfect opportunity to employ it along Cruse. So could you consider researching that and seeing if it would apply to our situation?
Paul, I think you're referring to a land trust model.
That could be, I don't know.
And
I did talk to Andre Holiday, the city commissioner. He's aware of this.
yeah, and that's something that the city is looking at as a general concept for providing more affordable housing options throughout the whole city. So that's something that we are aware of and are working towards.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question? May I?
You sure can.
Okay, this is Becky Fiske. I think I like the plan. Cruse needs to be changed. It's pretty cold and useless in many ways. I think that we will continue to have increased traffic to our trail system. And we live along this route. We see it. And we need bike paths, and we need, that's great that you're trailing people and walking people. I am concerned about the option of closing Cruse between Cutler and Broadway. I just am worried about sort of boxing people in versus keeping a smaller street that allows people, I'm pointing at the map, but allows people to go. They can come through downtown in two different ways. They're not having to go through the middle of downtown. And the plan is to increase housing, so there'll be even more people there. I think we should always count on there's going to probably be more people. And And I'm very hesitant to support closing Cruse completely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky and Paul. Thanks for sharing.
Looks like Gary Weens has a question, so go ahead, Gary.
Okay, thank you. I live in the claim stake development south of the south end of this planned area, and we probably have among the apartments, the condominiums, and the townhouses probably 100 residents, I'm guessing, in this little small area. Yeah, the arrow shows where it is. And right now, I acknowledge that the green strip, the grassy strip, and the Cruse Avenue right-of-way is public street, but it's really a de facto park. It's used by many of the residents to walk their pets, to sunbathe and picnic. I agree that it's underutilized. It's not used a lot, but it does provide an amenity to the people who live in the claim stake area. So taking that into consideration, there is a lot of green space in what you proposed, but I would hope that consideration would be given to making sure that it's very proximate, very close to the claim stake area, some of it, so that people would still retain some public parkland that they could use for various purposes. Hopefully not all of the land surrounding the two residential units you've shown at the south end would be private property, and that there'd be some public access through there. That about sums up my concern. I think these are both terrific proposals, and I'm excited to see what they will do to eliminate some barriers to people who want to go downtown, and to draw more people into using this part of downtown. Thank you.
Gary, I'm glad you actually made those comments, because if you look at the image that's up on the screen now, I could have shown another 4 or 5 townhouses that would have filled up all of that property, but kind of specifically thought that there still needed to be that green space buffer zone as an amenity, really for everybody, as a public benefit. And so that's kind of why I intentionally stopped the townhouse development. And there's still a very large chunk of green space land right there that would serve that purpose. Good comments.
Great. So Lee, I'll call on you in 1 second. I'd just like to point out that we've also gotten some email comments as well. And that's definitely a good way to comment if you can't attend any of the future meetings here. If you go to the Community Development Department website via the city's website, you'll find my email. Sorry, I'm Mike McConnell. My email and phone number there. So feel free going forward to use that, definitely. With that, Lee, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, a couple of questions, and they both deal with parking. I'm on the BID. The one issue that the BID gets hit with daily is parking. There's not enough parking downtown. My perception of this plan, I think it's pretty nifty, and I think it would provide means of many people getting into the downtown area. But it also does seem that it steals some available parking spaces, and I'm not sure that's prudent. The other question I had is on the high-rise, the low-income high-rise at the corner of Cutler and Cruse. Is there going to be parking for that? I don't see it in this image, and I'm wondering whether or not there's going to be parking built into the building, or is there another source of parking for that high-rise building?
I think when it comes to the ultimate solution there, Helena Housing Authority is going to probably do a pretty careful analysis of what their needs are and would need to solve them within their property.
Oh, okay, so that's up to their devices.
Yep, I would think so. I don't see that as being a city, consideration to resolve.
Yeah, my point being is even if you provide parking for these townhomes, there are going to be people visiting the people in the townhomes, and parking is a critical issue in the downtown. We probably get, and I'm guessing right now, I bet we get 4 to 5 emails a day, 15 a week at least, that deal with there's not enough parking downtown. And I go off on a toot because people hate the parking meters downtown. And they believe that Helena should be the only city in Montana, a larger city, that doesn't charge for parking. But you have to maintain the infrastructure. And with these, there's a business in town that would be in this area. We have probably been told once a month that business is going to go out of business because there's not enough parking. So I just raised that because it's going to splash back on this whole proposal. So
it's interesting that you mentioned that. I was on the BID board for 8 years, and I know exactly what you're talking about.
It's never ending.
And it never will end.
I know. And that's why this plan, I think, has try to come up with a means of, maybe we need another high rise, the Jackson Street garage, add another level to that garage, or put a parking garage on the Chambers space. I don't know. And that's very expensive. That's bloody expensive to do that. But that's going to be an issue I can see coming down the pike. Other than that, I think the proposal is pretty nifty. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lee.
So Mike, do we have more hands raised? I can't see them on my screen.
We do not, although Lee's hand is still raised. Looks like Ms. Piskey has a question, comment, or Paul does, I guess. Paul, if you unmute yourself and you'll be able to ask it. There you go.
Yeah, it's me. I just want to say that I like the idea of leveled parking spaces rather than having this sprawling surface parking of just flat lots. I really think we need to start layering our parking, saving the surface of the earth, making our footprint a little bit smaller to add more space for businesses and residences. That's all I wanted to say is just, yes, I'm in favor of that.
Thanks, Paul.
You're welcome.
Mike, I don't see anyone else's hand raised. Although Kathy is posting something in the chat.
Well, this has been, it's always interesting because with each one of these, we get a little bit more insight into what I think is going to help us find the right solution for Cruse Avenue. And I just want to emphasize again for everybody that we're midstream in this process of studying what the possibilities are and collecting input from stakeholders and the public at large. And I think the end product will be some hybrid version of everything that we're seeing and collecting, probably with some options. One of the things I've been involved in master planning in Helena for over 20 years. And the worst plan is one that gets completed and put on the shelf and doesn't happen. So as we start to look at the feasibility and the costs associated with implementing any final solution, I'd rather see a narrowed street that happens in 5 years than a linear park that doesn't happen for 20 years, for example, because it enhances our downtown. It's going to contribute to the growth of Helena, good growth in the core areas where it should happen. One stakeholder meeting that we had, or maybe it was an internal meeting, we were discussing developing Cruse Avenue as an urban downtown extension of our core. But the reality is that we have enough areas along Last Chance Gulch from Lindale up through, up to the Walking Mall for the next 20 years to build buildings. And if you go a block either side of that, there's even more room. So Cruse Avenue's been there for 35 to 40 years now. And as Adam points out, there are three businesses or entities along the entire distance that have a driveway that accesses off of Cruse, which tells you something.
Yeah, that's right, Mike. Thanks for sharing that. And I just think it represents a great opportunity to do something with Cruse, because we don't have a very mature built environment accessing Cruse, with only a handful of curb cuts that are accessing buildings. I think it represents a real opportunity to do something that could enhance the corridor. There's a comment from Kathy Burwell about the IR building front parking lot. That's duly noted, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. I think one of the stakeholders we talked to is involved with that project, and our understanding is that they are planning on doing something there at that location. And this is our attempt to try and reflect that there may be a development there in the future based on some of the plans that they're looking at. So that may be subject to change based on if they're going to be changing the plans for that building. Thank you for sharing that.
Looks like Becky's hand is still raised. I don't know if you have another question, Paul. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, that's right. I have another question. Becky and I live on State Street, which, as you probably know, is what Cutler turns into as soon as you take Cutler exit off of Cruse. And a small group of neighborhood residents went to the city commission, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago, and asked if they couldn't do something about that intersection because of the hazard to pedestrians and bike riders going up or down that intersection, particularly on it'd be the south side of the intersection where there's a lot of trees. There's a big curve there, and pedestrians and bike, yes, that's right. It's very hard for oncoming cars to see someone, and there are no sidewalks there. And I was trying to look at your plan, but it's a little bit too small for me to pick out. I assume there's going to be some sidewalks connecting State Street to Cruse.
I'll just zoom in on that and we can look at it. Yeah, so the thought I had, because we can narrow up this Cutler throat, and this diagram doesn't exactly line up over it, but if we did say like that, we definitely have the ability to have good sidewalks on both sides of Cutler Street that come up, that connect to our sidewalk system and trail system that we're sort of developing in these schemes. So that's what you're seeing here, are sidewalks that would come along either side of Cutler up to
Warren. Okay, but yeah. They don't appear to connect with Warren from what I'm seeing.
That's just my sketch.
Oh, okay. So they will.
They would continue. I wouldn't stop them right there.
Okay, good. And that would be very important.
And once you get across Warren Street, there is no sidewalk on the north side of State Street. So there isn't very adequate sidewalk on the south side of State
Right where
Street.
your pointer is right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, so. But
We would,
yeah.
yeah, Becky and Paul, we would hope that the improvements along Cruse would help facilitate additional, pedestrian and, bicycle improvements through the supportive neighborhoods as well. And that, the focus on connectivity would continue as, after Cruse has been improved. The other thing too, Mike, if you want to point out to that crossing there, what Mike has done is he's really narrowed Cruse Avenue even more. Could you talk a little bit about that, Mike, as well? That crosswalk that you've designed?
Yep. So in every scenario where we identify these crosswalks, we eliminate the little parking. I had mentioned that the 40-foot wide street includes 8-foot parking on either side plus 12-foot drive lanes. But at these crossings and at every crossing, we narrow that down to 24 feet, which is a very manageable pedestrian as the safest way to do those crossings. The only thing you can do better than that is a raised intersection that actually mitigates traffic as a traffic calming device. But going across north to south would be that 24-foot distance, and also in the east to west. And that's consistent pretty much everywhere we anticipate having a pedestrian crossing.
That would be a tremendous improvement for the Cruse Street exit. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mike, could you also speak to the option of keeping the neighborhood center building in place, and maybe reiterate the conversation that we had this morning with that group? If the neighborhood center building were to stay there, what other options may exist to try and still improve connectivity up to Cruse, and keeping the building, but maybe we could work something out with the adjacent property owner. Could you maybe reiterate what you had this morning? Small group.
Sort of brainstorming in our session this morning about really this drive access off of Cruse, which is one of the things that we're struggling with trying to make the best of. And one of the things we talked about was, I'm going to draw some things on the screen. If there was a way, for example, to connect the parking lots between the old federal building and the necessary parking lot for the neighborhood center, I don't think this would be technically impossible to do. It would allow us to sort of close off, this access here and enhance the connectivity into the park. And I could see us, taking that fire tower plaza that I've been talking about, and how, this drive right now is actually a fairly gentle slope coming down to a point, perhaps right here, where we then actually make a connection into the park through make a bigger deal out of it. Right now it's kind of a narrow path, but we could make that a fairly nice connection. And so it's sort of a hybrid solution that keeps the neighborhood center in place, doesn't expand park space, but does improve connectivity to what we're proposing to do on Cruse Avenue. So the building would remain, I know they use this playground quite heavily on the other side of the park space, and all of that could maintain, and we would still have sort of a hybrid idea. That's the kind of stuff I think that's going to come out of these discussions, which I think ultimately will result in a technically feasible solution that's affordable and really addresses everybody's concerns.
Can I just say that I hate to chime in on the parking conversation, but I'm great with the idea of leaving the neighborhood center there, of course, but we also struggle with the parking that we have, because we have course, COVID has affected us greatly, and we haven't had our senior center open, but when it is open and when Head Start is in session, we need to maintain as many parking spaces as we can. And a lot of our employees park on Cruse Avenue right now because during the, especially during the winter months when we would typically have the AARP tax assistance clinic comes into our building, and we've got Head Start and we've got seniors coming. We enforce that our employees have to park up on Cruse, and that's not going to work with either the narrowing or turning it into a park. So not to be difficult, but I wonder if we did something like that where you connected us with the federal building parking lot, if there's any possibility of us using some of that.
So
Just an idea.
I would like to actually respond to that. So right now, I think the parking is allowed from about where my cursor is over to this point.
Right.
Only on this side of the street. There's no parking allowed on the other side of the street.
Right.
In the narrowed street solution, we actually provide parking on both sides of Cruse for the entire distance. And so it would go all the way down on both sides and all along everywhere. So this is one of the areas where on this side of the proposed solution, we're going to be increasing the amount of parking in the area, I think, pretty significantly.
Okay, I'm sorry. I do remember that you talked about that parking.
It's just that, you know, right now, because of the way that those spurs have to separate to access Park or Cutler, there's just no way to have parking on the other side of that street. But there's definitely opportunity here. And what I haven't done, which I'm going to do, is count how many spaces we're able to keep along Cruse the entire distance, all the way to Lawrence, because there's a lot of areas where we're going to be able to maintain the parking count, at least on Cruse, and increase it in certain areas, which parking is always fickle because it's not just having parking, it's having it in the right spots.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Looks like Paul might have another question or comment. Your hand is raised. I'm seeing some shaking heads, so I guess not. Is there anyone else that has any questions, comments, thoughts about these proposals?
Well, it's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you everyone for participating, for sharing your time this afternoon with us. If there aren't any more comments, we'll go ahead and wrap for this session. And we'll invite you to attend the wrap-up session that is tomorrow night at 5:30 to 7. We'll be sharing the feedback and input that we've received throughout this process, and you'll get a good sense of what direction we'll be heading in terms of the most viable alternative. And as Mike has said, you know, our goal here is to really create a plan that's actionable and that can be implemented, not one that will sit on the shelf, but one that will have some life to it. And we welcome all of your input and thoughts, because that's really the only way that this is really going to happen and that we'll see success, is by having something that's community driven and reflects the goals and objectives of you as citizens of Helena. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you Thursday evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.